Kelly, and we are starting tonight just ahead of a moment that will help define President Biden's legacy, as he explains in his own words on camera to Americans why he's deciding to withdraw from the 2024 ticket and pass the baton to Vice President Harris. It's a speech you're going to watch here live the second it begins. And the White House is sprinkling a few tea leaves as to how he might frame the months ahead for him this term. Listen.
He didn't step down from campaigning or from running because he didn't believe he can serve in a second term. That is not why. And what I would say, as I just finished my opening, I would say tune in to what he has to say tonight, and he will lay that out.
All right, tune in. We sure will. But on the campaign trail now, you've got former President Trump. He's set to speak shortly at his first rally since President Biden dropped out. And you've also got Vice President Kamala Harris, now front and center for the Democrats, with the election just over about 100 days away, framing this race as a choice between compassion and chaos in remarks to a historically black sorority in just the last couple hours. Listen.
In this moment, I believe we face a choice between two different visions for our nation. One focused on the future, the other focused on the past. And with your support, I am fighting for our nation's future.
Now, it's an interesting moment in the electoral cycle, or 2024 period, not even just the electoral cycle, but it's two things that are converging. One is where the country is going, where the country wants to go progressively, nationally, right? And then there's the international, where the country wants to go internationally, how the country wants to define its partnerships in the future. So today is mostly about that. And Netanyahu, Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Party, as they tend to be the progressive party. Also, even internationally, Trump didn't display quite a real hold over like international policy. And I'm not saying that if given the right approach, maybe some of those things couldn't have turned out better or couldn't be utilized. But it's clear he doesn't have a detailed understanding of that's more complex than just we're here and we're not here. We leave and or we don't leave. I like you or I hate you. This kind of thing. It's got to be some nuances. So this is what today will be about, folks. I hope everybody's having a good evening, good morning, regardless of where you are. Have a great day. It's wonderful weather here in Copenhagen, and we will continue with that wonderful weather.
Big question now. Who could appear on stage next to her at some point as her running mate if she does clinch the Democratic nomination? NBC News is reporting out the ever less short list with Pete Buttigieg and Andy Beshear added to the mix here. It's all part of a vetting and selection process that could typically take months, but for Democrats, it's going to be compressed into a matter of days. We've got team coverage from every angle. Vaughn Hilliard traveling with the former president, Yamiche Alcindor with the vice president in Indiana. But I want to start with Kelly O'Donnell with the view from the White House. As we look ahead now, Kelly, to this critical moment for President Biden, in so many ways, it is a legacy moment. It is already going to be a history-making moment as well. Talk us through the expectations and what you're learning.
Well, Hallie, it's about writing this next chapter and what will be a final chapter of public life for President Biden. We have heard today from officials who say he will give us the rationale for his decision not to run when he believed he could actually run and govern in a second term. They say it is not medical related. We believe, based on our reporting, that he was counseled by those closest to him and certainly listening to the words of the party about what they felt. And he made a decision based on the dynamics of the race. We'll hear more about that. But the president has about 6 months left in office. And with that time, and obviously being president, the sitting president is always a consequential role. Even advisors today sort of brushed off the notion of being a lame duck, that the president is always an active player in.
It's really interesting because when the shoe was on the other foot and, when you talk about parties and how they support, their leaders, their presidents and other leaders, by the way, right? congressional leaders, House leaders, Senate. It doesn't matter, right? But in this case, when you compare the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, the Democratic Party is more, there's more opportunity and ability to dissent within the party without it imploding on its core values, right? And you heard a lot of debate from people that thought, about Biden's age, whether he was too old or not too old. I myself, at the time when the issue came up, I didn't think he was too old. And I didn't see his age as a matter necessarily. I didn't see it that way. And but at the same time, I do like the fact that he was willing to see that issue come up and be presented. And although he didn't necessarily agree with it, he stepped down. That I applaud personally. I think that is wonderful because that shows he has a level of intelligence to know that reality is often what's in people's minds. And you can't always overtake it. It's similar to racism. Like people judge by your look. They look and they judge. So when they look at Biden, they see, oh, okay, Biden, he looks old. Therefore, that is how his brain works. It's the same thing with being black. People look at you and they assume this is how your brain works. They assume you have certain abilities and other abilities you won't have. They assume a lot about your history, your past, who you are. So people can circumvent getting to know you by asserting these kind of things on you, which is, your color, your race, your ethnicity, and in this case, it could be gender, but in this case, in Biden's case, it's age. So that's a very real thing. People couldn't really get over it. But again, it's his choice. I myself say if there's no doctor that's in the White House uh, that's saying that he's sick and he can't serve, then there's not an issue. If there's no other people within the White House saying that he can't serve explicitly, that he cannot serve, not can he run, because that's something different. That's not even really after you win, it has nothing to do with campaigning pretty much anymore. It's how you govern the country. So Biden, he's a sitting president. So I wasn't really worried about that. But the fact that he stepped down, I think is wonderful. Now, I think it gave the Democrats an advantage because it shows that their party is flexible. Their party leaders are flexible. But if you compare that to Donald Trump, you will or the Republican Party, you will see a completely different party. There can be no dissension, none whatsoever. It's not welcomed. If you come with it, you're going to get heckled. And maybe worse, obviously, because again, these people actually thought it was okay to storm the Capitol in the fashion that they did, right? And to invade the Capitol. It's called an insurrection. I mean, they went in there against the law. The law told them no, and they said, "Nah, we coming in here anyway," and then tried to stop the vote. That's the particular thing about it, to try to stop the vote. Then they called for people's deaths. Nancy Pelosi, Mike Pence, right? Even though he's very rigid, almost like a robot. I couldn't tell much from him myself at all as a vice president, even less than Harris. But there's no dissent on that end. The Republican Party, the right wing, you cannot dissent. They don't welcome dissent. So they're fractured in a completely different way. Democrats, they don't fracture, I would say. They constantly reevaluate, constantly evaluate the situation, and they will then make choices later, decisions later. They don't do things fast and immediate, but they do things when it's necessary. They handle business. But
The national conversation. Now, a lot of us will be focused on the campaign trail, which now includes Kamala Harris along with Donald Trump. But for President Biden tonight, it's about looking the American people in the eye through the lens of the camera, telling the story of what made this decision come about, and then giving a sense of what he wants to get done between now and January 20th, 2025. Some of that is a shared vision with Kamala Harris. Some of it is about his own agenda and things that he believes he can get done. Legislation is challenging in an election year, to be sure, but also using the weight of the office. And when it comes to things like foreign policy, which we'll see more of tomorrow with Benjamin Netanyahu, often the president is a singular figure in American life and can have a lot of sway. So also emotional. I've been talking to those who've been serving with the president who expected that he would compete in the election. And they, of course, on his side, thought there would be a second term. There's been a lot of sadness, even one using the term mourning, about the fact that this decision changes his life, the life of the country, and for all of those on his team, official and campaign, it changes things too. Hallie?
Can you give us a bit of a vibe check, Kelly? I imagine that staffers might be together watching the president's speech tonight.
There is a plan for a reception and for people to be in their offices and watching this together. It is one of those collective moments, much like a State of the Union address. This one, of course, is infused with a lot of emotion for them and for him, and also a sense of pride, many of them say, because they believe that the president made a choice which goes against what the impulses of politicians are typically ascribed to be about their own agenda, their own ambition, and they believe that this is the president reaching a hard decision, one that took him a while to get to, but one that they say puts the country in front of his own personal agenda and his own ambitions. So choosing to be a one-term president at a consequential time.
Kelly O'Donnell, lots to watch, as that's going to be a late night for you. Thank you so much. We'll have special coverage, of course, of that address.
And the interesting thing here is that all this is converging again. Now it's also, not only did Biden make that decision to step down, but while he's doing it and while there's an election cycle going on at the same time, then enters the room Netanyahu. Netanyahu comes in and is another political dynamic.
From the Oval Office at 8 o'clock Eastern. However you're watching right now on NBC News Now or over on our NBC network, Yamiche Alcindor is traveling with the vice president in Indiana because while the attention is on President Biden tonight, obviously, for all the reasons that Kelly laid out, it has been, and starting at about, 9:01 p.m. tonight, right, we'll return to Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the front runner to replace the president at the top of the ticket. We have now seen her yet again delivering this kind of campaign message, Yamiche. Walk us through the dynamics there and what we don't see behind the scenes. What's happening on the staffing front? What's happening on the strategy front, if you will?
Yeah, well, I want to start, Hallie, with the fact that the vice president came to Indianapolis to speak to a gathering of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. It's part of the Divine Nine. They are a group of historically black fraternities and sororities. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which is part of the Divine Nine. And if I'm looking out, it's a sea of blue and white. It's a sea of also black women who are really the most loyal base of the Democratic Party. So they're really leaning in to make sure that their base is energized. They want to also be leaning into the energy, talking about fundraising, talking about the idea that they want people to be knocking on doors. And to that end, she was leaning into what the history of these organizations are as a Divine Nine. These are organizations that were founded by people who really focused on service, focused on civil rights. So take a listen to what she told this crowd.
We know when we organize, mountains move. When we mobilize, nations change. And when we vote, we make history. So let us continue to fight with optimism, with faith, and with hope. Because when we fight, we win.
Chaos on the streets of Washington. Police using pepper spray. A crowd enraged.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
Many here believe Washington has rolled out the red carpet for a war crime.
Netanyahu, you're a liar!
Thousands took to the streets calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, some accusing their government of being complicit in what they see as a genocide.
We are not armed. We don't have anything. They are spraying us.
Speaker, the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
But on Capitol Hill, The focus of the ire outside got a standing ovation inside. Benjamin Netanyahu lauded, the perfect welcome for a man trying to revive his international image. There were, though, plenty of political no-shows and subtle signs of deep division amongst Democrats.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
Israel's Prime Minister tried to start with some grace and gratitude.
I thank President Biden for his heartfelt support for Israel after the savage attack on October 7th. When we stand together, something very simple happens. We win, they lose.
You know, and the other interesting thing is the global dynamic, the conflicts as well that are ongoing at this very moment. I mean, if, you know, how does the U.S. influence its power over Israel? And to what extent should they go? I think is becoming the question that most Americans are starting to have, whether if you agree with how much support they should get or if they should get no support. Still, you know, what's the U.S. obligation? Because you've seen situations like in Afghanistan, for example, how that pullout happened. And I'm sure that most people would expect that if the U.S. pulled out away from Israel, likely they would be under siege, probably instantly. And it's just my opinion, but it appears to be the case because look, how long has this fighting been going on? For what purpose has all this fighting been going on? We're talking about decades and decades and decades of this, right? And now it's reached its worst, essentially. And the U.S. has stood behind Netanyahu the entire time, not just yet Netanyahu, but Israel the entire time. And I think people should be careful to understand that Netanyahu is not Israel. You know, he's an elected official, but he's not your typical Israeli, you could say. That's not even what the platform is. His platform is not liberal and democratic and inclusive. You know what I'm saying? So, but in any case, all those things are converging. Let's see here.
But he also didn't hold back on his American critics.
Yet incredibly, many anti-Israel protesters, many choose to stand with evil. They stand with Hamas.
Hello,
These
Andrea.
protesters stand with them. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Now, you know, it's been a few days since that's happened now. It's been a few days. So I'm curious how many of those protesters were in support of Hamas. I did see some signs, to be honest with you. I saw some pictures where it said Hamas. I don't know, but it's worth reviewing anyway. It doesn't matter if you saw one or two, and if you can remember exactly what it is. It's become an issue because he stated it. And again, I don't know if y'all heard my last podcast on this issue, but it's problematic, and it is different when you have a leader like a parliament leader like Netanyahu come to the U.S. and speak about what our democracy should look like. You see what I mean? That's very weird. And he doesn't do it directly, but indirectly, because he's commenting on how people protest in the U.S. And I think Americans need to take note of that. And this is one of the things I was pointing out, because now think about this. Trump and Project 2025, they would love to put the military on protesters. That's one of the things they're asking for. That's out of the many egregious things that they're demanding and seeking to obtain, right? So when you have a leader like this, you have to ask yourself, okay, we as Americans, we've been very for Israel. But is this leader, Netanyahu, is he for the U.S.? I think we should ask that question. And just because it's our tax dollars, and again, Netanyahu is not Israel, they can elect a new official. But in any case, he's become a problem. Check it.
It was the Republicans who invited him here, daring Democrats to shun an ally.
Hold on. Now, let me see here. Do you see? I don't see End all aid. Okay. Genocide. Okay. Not another dime for genocide. Stop arming Israel. Uh, Ali, end all U.S. support. I believe that says wanted. Yes. Now there was a report that also came out, y'all, that I read, and it's not true. There's been an impression that the ICC, I believe, no, it is true. It's not what I've seen some statements made about it, and it's not actually accurate 100% what they're saying. But here's the thing about the ICC, right? And in Israel and him visiting. Uh, Apparently, Nancy Pelosi she spoke out in advance that she wouldn't invite him, right? And it has something to do with that. Now, the U.S., China, and Russia are not members of the IC, or they're members, but they haven't ratified that ICC agreement into law in their own countries. So there's no national law on how the U.S. would respond to the ICC. Just like there's not in Russia, just like there's not in China. China's the only one who didn't even, I believe, sign the agreement in the first place. Russia and the U.S. signed it. So those are things people should think about when you hear stories like that. But in any case, I watched a lot of the live footage, and I did see a few things about Hamas. But um, let's go further, because I think there's some mentions about this.
A leader some call an obstacle to peace.
Rarely has such a divisive political figure been so honoured by America's political class, but this is an awkward, delicate and potentially problematic test for Democrats. Progressives in the party are deep.
There's a sign right here. I don't find that so strange. This sign, it says U.S. is complicit in Gaza. I don't see that so to be so extreme of a statement. So that's not the things. That's not what they're talking about, though. Apparently, there's some Hamas.
About America's support for the war in Gaza. And soon, the people in this crowd will take their opinions to the ballot box.
Many Democrats want the US to stop arming Israel.
This is a new thing. This is another thing, too. When you go on social media a lot, I encounter people. I don't know about you, but I encounter people on social media, different social media. It could be Facebook, it could be Instagram, whatever, right? Twitter. But when I encounter people, I encounter people that don't always have their facts 100% straight when it comes to this conflict. Like, so there's a lot of there's this idea out there that Americans support Israel, or that Americans, that we have one view about Israel and support of Israel, right? And we don't have one view. We don't have two views. We have 3 or 4 or 5 different views about how we should be dealing with Israel. That, and it varies a little bit from president to president, but obviously we've always been arming them, so, and giving them other aid. Now, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's whoever, right? Now, but the thing is that the problem seems to be that the killings and the mass amount of civilian death in Gaza, right, has been so overwhelming that it constitutes war crimes, essentially. So, do you want to invite a person like that that's being accused of war crimes? He doesn't have to be convicted, but isn't that unprecedented? Isn't that weird that you would have that person speaking to your Congress? And I think Nancy Pelosi, that's what she was getting at. Now, it's important for people outside of the U.S. that want to influence U.S. policy to get their facts straight, because there's some Americans that have not been happy about any of this, the support of Israel, especially with the taking of more land, the rebuilding on top of land they continue to create new settlements, all of this stuff. There's plenty of Americans that have disagreed with that. However, our tax dollars go and get spent according to what Congress does. So it's important that Congress people and senators take this issue up, you know, because if the Congress and the Senate doesn't take this issue up, it's and then get the president's signature, there won't really be a lot of smooth change. There will be change, but it won't be smooth. It won't be the change you might always want. You see what I mean? And when you have a lot of power and influence, you have to yield it correctly. And I think this is where the criticism is real about the relationship with the U.S. So U.S. better get it together with Israel, because there could be other things that come, you know, from the fallout of ending a relationship too. You know, it's a lot of sides to it. Ending a relationship with Israel doesn't necessarily promise less war. In other words, for the U.S., they're not necessarily synonymous, those two ideas, you know. But let's see.
Families of some of the hostages, America needs to back away, and fast.
How do you feel about Netanyahu's visit to Washington?
And we're saying here to the United States, to the government, to the Congress, to the Senate, Netanyahu is our problem. Ban him.
I don't understand what he's doing here. John only doing PR for himself, because he's looking for his own political survival.
He should stay home, bring them home, seal the deal, and end the war.
Now, you see, these are the type of people that Trump, he would agree with calling the military, the U.S. military, on people like this. You know, so it's important that when we listen to Netanyahu give his speech, that we think about it a little bit. Like, would he use the military against us too? That's when it gets real as an American, because it's one thing to not understand how relations work between Israelis and Palestinians, or Israel and other nations in the Middle East, right? It's one thing to not understand that clearly, but it's another thing to not understand when someone looks at you too with that same disdain. American, could it be that Netanyahu looks at some people like you with disdain? Would he use the military to beat down protests in the U.S.? Would he do that? I think it looks a little different when you think of it that way.
Washington has opted to host a hugely polarizing man at a time of massive upheaval.
Look, this is not even the military. This is just the police. And you got people like Trump that want to advocate for the military.
Being a stage for yet more fury, and it could well backfire.
This I don't agree with. See, this is where I think it could get it gets a little strange. Now, one of the things that they have said, that Netanyahu said, and I don't know if it's the protesters that were at this rally, is people say things like death to Israel or death to America, like death to America. Do you think someone in that crowd, in that protest, should be saying that? I'm not saying that they have. And is that true? Let me just play. I'm gonna research that while I let this play a second.
Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Washington.
Two seconds. Oh, well, wait a second. Let me see. Sorry about that. I should have rocked this next video. Here we go. Now, I paired that up against to this. This is 5 months ago, Nancy Pelosi's statements. Check this.
Representatives Nanci Pelosi. In Gaza, the U.S. has warned that Israel has killed far too many Palestinians, but is Jerusalem listening? How will funding for Ukraine clear the current bloc in the U.S. Congress? And is President Biden really too old to run for a second term? Nanci Pelosi, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Conflict Zone.
When you look at all the various conflicts that are in progress around at the moment and their capacity, their potential to spread, are we reaching a new and dangerous inflection point?
Well, we have, but I think everything is an opportunity. I do think that people are starting to think, what is this about war? We cannot have innocent people, children, families, being victims of war when they're not even combatants in it. So we have to find another way to resolve conflict, and because this is just uncivilized and brutal.
Well, let's talk about that area where...
So this was Nancy Pelosi about 5 months ago. And so she already, and other Congress members had already, senators as well, had already been discussing this matter about the brutality of this conflict in the Middle East, or in Israel, in Palestine actually, but between the two groups. Yeah, and so now leading up to it, now Netanyahu is actually speaking. So it's been some time that's gone on, and yeah, we're going to see how it goes.
Innocents are being killed in Gaza. Israel has been preparing its forces to fight in the southern city of Rafah on the border with Egypt, where more than 1 million Palestinians have sought refuge from the war. Last week, the White House said it wouldn't support a military operation there and warned of a disaster if it went ahead. What should the U.S. do if Israel ignores that warning?
Well, I hope that there's some other place that Israel can go in terms of being careful about civilian life. They have made it clear that they want to rid Gaza of Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They committed an act of brutality, barbaric assault on Israel on October 7th. And following that, we see many children, families, grandmas suffering from the consequences of their barbaric action. So when you say they want to go into the city, and now that city, I understand, has 3 to 5 times more people than it would normally have, because there are so many refugees there. And we're saying we don't support that. Well, we haven't supported any of their aggression. We recognize Israel's right to protect itself, defend its borders, and the rest. But I would hope that they would hear the call of Secretary Blinken and, of course, President Joe Biden. All of us are friends of Israel, and be careful about the civilians.
The White House has escalated its rhetoric.
Now, that didn't actually happen. That didn't actually happen. So you could see there was already this recommendation or request that they bring down the tension, right? And Israel did not go along with that. Not outright, not in a manner to which you could not mistake for anything else. You see what I mean? And so now he's visiting. Netanyahu is visiting. So what? He wasn't invited by the president. Let me see. Let me just double check a few things here. Hold on. First of all, it does say that apparently there's some articles here about some protesters chanting death to America. Let me see here. Let me just put this up on the screen. Where is it at? This is okay. This is from the Jerusalem Post, so keep that in mind. But not that it would be lies or anything. I'm just saying, just so you know. Here, now check this out.
From the river to the sea means the absolute annihilation of the Zionist regime. Israel shar mutlaq. It is absolute evil. It is a cancer in the Middle East and in the world. There is no way to deal peacefully with such an entity. There can be no two-state solution.
Where is this local? Let me see something. Let me come out of this for a second. All right, let me just read this article here. Death-born Michigan rally. Recent weeks have seen other calls for the destruction of the United States by pro-Palestinian activists. So this is in Michigan. This is April 9th, 2024. Okay, so this is not the same rally. This is not the same rally. Michigan activists, okay. So I think, let me go back here. Why did it come up? Was Netanyahu in the country at that time? I believe he was. Let me see here. Let me see what the let's see. That might be about right. No. So no, he didn't. Okay, so I wonder what that rally was about. It was just okay. So now we got that. That's just a random rally. So it must be in line with some actions Israel is taking. That might make sense. So in a video now deleted from the community news outlet Dearborn.org, an activist identified as Memre and Dearborn.org as Tariq Bazzi explained that Quds Day protests are anti-American rather than just focusing on Israel because of the funding that okay, well, that's not what I was looking for. But anyway, let's just go back. There's more to see here. Here we are.
There were moments where the crowd clashed with police, and at one point, our crew witnessed Capitol Police spraying pepper spray at a large segment of the crowd. There was a massive police presence here. Capitol Police, Washington, D.C. Police, Park Police, also backed by hundreds of NYPD officers who came down here to support the effort. And Union Station behind me was cordoned off with bike racks. The only people who would go in are those who had an Amtrak ticket. There are restaurants inside. You weren't allowed inside. And again, there was a large presence here for about an hour after Netanyahu stopped speaking, and then the crowd began to disperse, Hallie.
Ken Delaney and live for us there, just on the street at Union Station. Ken, thank you. Let's take you to Wall Street now, because in just the last hour at the close of the market day, Senator from Washington, Patty Murray. She's joining us now. Senator Murray, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, great to see you.
So I know you were not in the chamber for that speech. My assumption is that you're watching. Former Speaker Pelosi called it the worst representation of any foreign dignitary. I wonder how you see the speech.
Well, I was in my office. I did watch the entire speech, and I am a strong supporter of Israel, and I know the importance of us being a strong ally for them. But I just personally did not want to be a prop in a political speech for Netanyahu. I've been very clear that I don't agree with his approach to this war, and felt it was more important that I watch but not be there.
You would have presided over the speech as the president pro tem, of course, and with the vice president, VP Harris, on the campaign trail. We instead saw Senator Cardin in that position there on the dais next to Speaker Johnson. I wonder why not take the opportunity, or did you consider taking the opportunity to show your opposition, right to Benjamin Netanyahu himself, right to his face there?
Not as easy to do as you think when you're sitting right behind somebody who's delivering a speech. I felt it was more important that I hear what he had to say, but again, not be a prop.
You chair, of course, the Appropriations Committee. Obviously important not to get in the weeds here, but that national security supplemental gave tens of billions of dollars to help support the war push from Israel here. The prime minister was very clear today. They need more. He essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, more tools means this war ends more quickly, in his view. Will you call for any conditions on additional aid, like a ceasefire or other protection?
Where do you stand on this issue of Israel and Palestine? I mean, it is interesting because, number one, obviously it's been a lot of money pumped into Israel by the U.S. And I guess the U.S. has received what they consider a decent partnership. Whatever they get in return, I think it's more geopolitical. There's a lot of things in the works, between Israel, Saudi Arabia, Where else? It's another nation. I forget. It's 3 nations there. And I believe it's a trade. It's about trade and military security, a joint military thing that the U.S. proposed, by the way, which the U.S. has been pumping money into that too. Right now, yeah, I don't know how well that's going. It's ongoing, and obviously, it depends on politics too, because maybe whoever gets into Congress or whoever gets in the White House decides they don't want to fund these things. They don't want to sign things into to write things into law or sign things into law. You never know how that could affect anybody that's receiving aid, from the U.S. This kind of aid. It's a lot of money, and voters are starting to look at that as a factor, in their own lives, not just in their own lives, but also at times wondering about also the U.S., how we engage the rest of the world. Is it for the betterment of the world, or is it also for the betterment of the U.S. always? Or is it sometimes detrimental to our politics?
Protections for Palestinians contingent on that money?
You're right. I am chair of the appropriations, worked really hard to get the supplemental across the line that included support for Israel, Ukraine, and for humanitarian relief in Gaza and around the world. That was an important component of that. That's how I look at that holistically. We are now writing our appropriations bills for next year, and I will look at them in the same light.
Okay. Let me ask you politically, switching gears a bit here, because obviously we're looking ahead to President Biden's speech in just a couple of hours from now. A very, I think fair to say, dramatic and newsmaking week for Democrats over the course of the last several days here. Let me start with the president's speech. What is the message you want to hear from him tonight? What do you think Americans need to hear from him tonight?
I think the president tonight will set the tone for what he needs to accomplish the rest of this year. We've got a lot of work to do, but also the sort of passing of the torch and what he sees as the opportunities are. I'll share with you a story that is just really coming to my mind right now. Many years ago, I was in a very tough re-election campaign in my state, and Joe Biden came out to campaign for me. I think he's virtually campaigned for almost every Democratic member at some point. But he came out, and he came to a rally, and he said to me, "You're going to win." And I said, "How'd you know?" And he said, "Because you guys are shoulders up." And what Joe Biden did by passing this to Kamala was give us a shoulders up, we're in this fight, we can win moment. He himself looked at this not as what it meant to him, but what it means to the country. And I think we are seeing that play out. It's very impressive of him to do this.
He is likely to make the case for what he's going to do for the remainder of this current term, right, from now until Inauguration Day, even as I'm sure you're aware, some Republicans are criticizing him, suggesting if he is not going to run for re-election, if he's not able to do that, then he's not able to run the country. Do you have any hesitation about President Biden's ability to conduct the business of the office from now through January?
I have none. He is very intent on making sure we finish all of our appropriations bills, which means our spending bills, how we're going to shape the budget of the future, how we're going to make sure we deal with the disasters in this country, and how we make sure that we are doing the right kinds of things that our country needs right now. Setting it up for next year when we will be looking at what a new president will bring to us. And I will tell you, I just have to share this with you as a strong supporter of Kamala. I am so excited about what I'm seeing in this country right now. I mean, the $127 million raised in just a few days. I think it's almost all of those small donors, new donors that are involved in that. Over 100,000 volunteers. You know, this is not about politics. This is a movement we are seeing. And I know exactly why. Because Kamala brings to our country a vision for the future that really helps general average Americans think, hey, this is about me. Will I have childcare? Will I be able to go to work and enjoy this economy and be able to take care of my family? Critically, will I, as a woman and someone who supports women, be able to make my own health care choices? She is just really bringing a dynamism to this campaign right now that I think just really propels us into next year, where we can really take on some of these fundamental issues that are so important in our country today for the generations to come and for all of us who care deeply about them.
I want to get back to that energy question, but just very quickly, Senator, do you believe it was the right move for President Biden to step off the ticket? Were you happy to see that?
You know, I will tell you this. What Joe Biden did was really contrary.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has had what she describes as a frank and constructive meeting with the visiting Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In it, the Democratic presidential hopeful expressed her serious concern about Palestinian civilian casualties in Israel's war with Hamas. She also reiterated her unwavering commitment to the U.S. allies' security, but urged Mr. Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire deal. Let's hear some of what Kamala Harris had to say after the meeting.
I have met with the families of these American hostages multiple times now, and I've told them each time they are not alone, and I stand with them. And President Biden and I are working every day to bring them home. I also expressed with the Prime Minister my serious concern about the scale of human suffering in Gaza, including the death of far too many innocent civilians. And I made clear my serious concern about the dire humanitarian situation there, with over 2 million people facing high levels of food insecurity, and 500,000 people facing catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity. What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. The images of dead children and desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety, sometimes displaced for the second, third, or fourth time. We cannot look away in the face of these tragedies. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering, and I will not be silent. It is time for this war to end, and end in a way where Israel is secure, all the hostages are released, the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can exercise their right to freedom, dignity, and self-determination. There has been hopeful movement in the talks to secure an agreement on this deal. And as I just told Prime Minister Netanyahu, it is time to get this deal done.
Our North America correspondent David Wills gave us the latest from Washington.
How many of you think that that is going to translate into something unique or different that from that comment or that statement that Kamala Harris gave? I mean, I like Kamala Harris and I'm a supporter of hers. I'm voting for Kamala Harris. So, but I'm still curious about that statement. In either case, it seems to be publicly more voices that are for a change in policy with Israel and the United States, you know, coming from the people. I don't believe Kamala Harris or the Dems, then they would jump on necessarily an issue if it didn't, you know, seem like an issue that was moving already politically and had some steam. And it is a serious debate about Israel and Palestine and what the limits of our relationship should be with the U.S., you know, and what we should be doing more to hold Israel accountable, since we're the ones that send them loads of military aid and funding, you know, through various ways. So, but in any case, while all of that is happening, hold on, let's just hear a little more.
Netanyahu met with both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris today, and the White House, in a readout of his meeting with Joe Biden, said that Mr. Biden called for a ceasefire in Gaza and for the release of the remaining hostages as soon as possible, as it put it. And Kamala Harris, as we just heard, went further than that, registering her concern about the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and saying that the time had come to do a deal. And she also said said to Mr. Netanyahu that she would not be silent about the suffering of the Palestinian people. Now, some here are taking that to mean that she may adopt a different stance, perhaps a more aggressive stance towards Israel than Joe Biden has done, should she be elected, of course, in the presidential election in November. Kamala Harris has been critical of the Israeli administration, most recently back in March. And a lot of people have been looking to see what she makes of Benjamin Netanyahu's visit these last few days as some sort of indication of how she would engage with the Israelis going forward.
Claimed that rival Kamala Harris had been disrespectful to Israel. And Netanyahu said he hopes Harris's comments about civilian casualties in Gaza won't harm ceasefire negotiations. Later in the day, Trump targeted Harris before a crowd of conservative Christian activists. He claimed, amongst other things, that she doesn't like Israel. CNN's Kristen Holmes has more from West Palm Beach, Florida.
Former President Donald Trump, speaking to a crowd of conservative Christians, went into his attacks on Kamala Harris. A very different Donald Trump than we have seen in the last couple of days, trying to hone in on his messaging when it comes to Harris. We had seen him trying out various lines, but this speech had more direct attacks, not just on her record as vice president, but also as her record as a senator, as her record in California. Now, of course, it was still a Donald Trump speech, so it went here, there was a lot of riffing. However, it was clear that they are trying to complete this mission of defining Kamala Harris in this race.
That's hilarious. Here, it was there.
A bum 3 weeks ago. She was a bum. A failed vice president in a failed administration with millions of people crossing, and she was the border czar. Now they're trying to say she never was the border czar. She had nothing to do with the border. She was the border czar.
And that's the thing. It's them who give people these names in the first place, and then they complain when someone tells them that,
The new candidate to defeat the most incompetent, unpopular, and far-left vice president in American history. That's what she is, the most incompetent, but certainly the most far-left. They were explaining.
Look, because that's so interesting you said it that way, because on one hand, it's incompetence, right? And then on the other hand, she's extreme far left. So which one is it? Is it incompetence? That means he really hates her. He has to put it that way. And he's projecting because he's the one who's incompetent.
To me, you can say Kamala, you can say Kamala. I said, don't worry about it.
You hearing this? He's the one that's incompetent.
Doesn't matter what I say. I couldn't care less. If I mispronounce it or not, I couldn't care less.
Something an incompetent person would say.
Some people think I mispronounce it on purpose, but actually I've heard it said about 7 different ways.
That's incompetent.
Now, one other notable moment tonight came as he was talking about abortion. Again, this was a Christian conservative group. As he started talking about exceptions when it came to abortion in terms of mother's health, incest, and rape, there was a section of the room that began booing what he was saying. Now, Donald Trump himself didn't react to the booing, but he did start talking about the fact that you have to believe, you have to follow what your heart believes, but that you also have to win elections.
He said, follow what your heart believes. What does that mean for a person like Trump?
Something we have heard him say before. Kristen Holmes, CNN, West Palm Beach, Florida.
Kamala Harris has been looking to prove herself to the public in the early days of her presidential campaign, and now she scored her biggest endorsement yet from former President Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle.
I can't have this phone call without saying to my girl, Kamala, I am proud of you. This is going to be historic.
We called to say Michelle and I couldn't be prouder to endorse you and to do everything we can to get you through this election and into the Oval Office.
Oh my goodness. Michelle, Barack, this means so much to me.
Well, the Vice President thanked the Obamas for their support and expressed gratitude for their long friendship as well. Now, according to fresh polls, Kamala Harris is erasing Donald Trump's lead in the presidential race. A Fox News poll shows a statistical dead heat in the 3 battleground states of Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin, and Harris leads Trump by 6 percentage points in Minnesota. A new poll from the Wall Street Journal indicates there's no clear leader nationwide. Among registered voters, Trump is polling at 49%, with the vice president at 47%, an improvement from Biden's numbers. In their last poll from early July, Mr. Biden trailed Trump by 6 percentage points. The margin of error just over 3% there. I'm joined now by Leslie Vinjamori. She's director of the US and Americas program at Chatham House. I mean, we are, if we look at Trump's speech last night, getting a sense of his plan of attack with Kamala. It seems this idea that she's a far left candidate and incompetent.
Exactly. But this is Trump and J.D. Vance, that ticket was, as we know, chosen before they realized that Kamala would be the lead presidential candidate on the Democratic side. And so we're seeing them rapidly adjust and needing to adjust with sort of a series of blunders, not least by Vance. But it does seem like it will be, the memory of that assassination attack, really very short time ago, when we all thought that there might be a moment of a transformed discourse, a unity led by President Trump, just simply hasn't come to pass. And we reverted very rapidly back into, attacks on the other candidates trying to frame Harris as being incompetent, making fun of her. But, on the part of J.D. Vance, taking some swipes at women, which are, not smart, and it will be very interesting to see how Donald Trump reacts to that. But this is, very short time. It hasn't even been a full week. The fact that the gap has closed between Harris and Trump, that she is polling, if you look at one poll of 18 to 34-year-olds, it was 60% Harris and 40% Trump. So clearly she is going for young voters. She is, setting out a slightly different position on Palestine and Israel, and really pushing hard on reproductive rights and women. So I think those will be some of the things that she will forefront in her campaign.
You're a very respected academic. We're wondering if you can figure out what Trump meant here from this soundbite last night.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
That's incompetence speaking again.
Over to you.
Well, I mean, look, everybody on Twitter has been playing that and replaying that. Democrats, academics saying this is what he wants to do. He wants to shut down democracy. What is the phrase? One vote, one man, one time. But I think Donald Trump is well known for playing to his audience. He sort of is willing to forget the fact that the world is also watching his words. He was speaking to Christians. It certainly sounds like a president that is a presidential candidate that is determined to shut down the democratic process. But it could mean, he speaks in code. It could mean I'm going to solve all the problems and shut down debate on the issues that you care about, and therefore voting will be less consequential. We all know that the contrast between these two candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, is vast on domestic issues, on a number of foreign policy issues. And so the stakes are high, the contrast is high, and both candidates are going to be really using this message to drive passion and enthusiasm amongst their voters. Donald Trump is willing to even use language that suggests that he's willing to subvert the democratic process and put an end to it. But, maybe he's saying something different. Maybe he was speaking to older voters. It is obviously very disturbing in light of the events of January 6th. His role.
Folks should take the man at his word.
In that. But again, he's speaking to his base. These are not voters that are going to switch who they're voting for because they're afraid of any risk to democracy. It's just about enthusing them, injecting passion, and ensuring that they get out and vote. And to a certain extent, amongst base voters, we'll see that on both sides. And I don't think you're going to see Kamala Harris willing to say that she'd shut down a presidential election process in the United States.
No. I mean, one thing she has been pulled up on is her comments after meeting Benjamin Netanyahu. It was seen as a departure, at least in tone, from Biden's policy. And, you know, Netanyahu and Trump, when they were together, were pretty pointed about that, weren't they? I mean, what did you make of what she said and the different approach she may take to the Middle East?
She's certainly taking a different approach. She made it very clear. She recognized on multiple points the suffering of Palestinians, the images that are being seen. She also recognized the profound distress to families and the community of having hostages held by Hamas. But she is a presidential candidate, soon to be with that nomination, that is not going to portray this as a one-sided conflict and is really pushing hard on the need for a ceasefire to get the hostages home and to end the suffering of Palestinians. And remember, she was sent just before October 7th on a tour of university campuses, again, intended to really inspire young voters. We know that young voters have a different perspective on Israel and Palestine, that there's been a lot of division over this war, even amongst those who support a state of Israel. They don't support the policies of Netanyahu. A lot of Netanyahu's people don't support his policies. So she really is moving to a position that is reflective of many people in the United States and around the world. That's still a shift, and an important one in the context of U.S. Elected officials. And she will get, and we've seen this, she will get heat from that in the political classes. But again, when it comes to voters, I think that she's tapping into some very important sentiments and feelings, especially amongst young voters and those Arab American voters in Michigan that we talk about. So there are a lot of constituencies. She's really, Kamala Harris, trying to expand the base of voters who feel committed to and passionate and feel like their policies, their values are represented, and their age and their diversity are represented in the Democratic Party.
Phil cares about, and that's being a confidence in her. I'm not.
Ticket had been stolen. There you go. $1 million is a lot of money. Worth that phone call. When we come back, how a pilot survived a plane crash in Nepal that killed everybody else on board. We've got the latest on the investigation. Plus, new video of a huge explosion at a tequila plant in Mexico. We'll tell you how they managed to put up the...
or Belushi, as we like.
You're seeing this here. This officer will lay that out. All right, tune in. We sure will. But on the campaign trail now, you've got former President Trump. He's set to speak shortly at his first rally since President Biden dropped out. And you've also got Vice President Kamala Harris, now front and center for the Democrats, with the election just over about 100 days away, framing this race as a choice between compassion and chaos in remarks to a historically black sorority in just the last couple hours. Listen.
In this moment, I believe we face a choice between two different visions for our nation. One focused on the future, the other focused on the past. And with your support, I am fighting for our nation's future.
A big question now, who could appear on stage next to her at some point as her running mate if she does clinch the Democratic nomination? NBC News is reporting out the ever less short list with Pete Buttigieg and Andy Beshear added to the mix here. It's all part of a vetting and selection process that could typically take months, but for Democrats, it's going to be compressed into a matter of days. We've got team coverage from every angle. Vaughn Hilliard traveling with the former president, Yamiche Alcindor with the vice president in Indiana. But I want to start with Kelly O'Donnell with The View from the White House. As we look ahead now, Kelly, to this critical moment for President Biden, in so many ways, it is a legacy moment. It is already going to be a history-making moment as well. Talk us through the expectations and what you're learning.
Well, Hallie, it's about writing this next chapter and what will be a final chapter of public life for President Biden. We have heard today from officials who say he will give us the rationale for his decision not to run when he believed he could actually run and govern in a second term. They say it is not medical related. We believe, based on our reporting, that he was counseled by those closest to him and certainly listening to the words of the party about what they felt. And he made a decision based on the dynamics of the race. We'll hear more about that. But the president has about 6 months left in office. And with that time, and obviously being president, the sitting president is always a consequential role. Even advisors today sort of brushed off the notion of being a lame duck, that the president is always an active player in the national conversation. Now, a lot of us will be focused on the campaign trail, which now includes Kamala Harris along with Donald Trump. But for President Biden tonight, it's about looking the American people in the eye through the lens of the camera, telling the story of what made this decision come about, and then giving a sense of what he wants to get done between now and January 20th, 2025. Some of that is a shared vision with Kamala Harris. Some of it is about his own agenda and things that he believes he can get done. Legislation is challenging in an election year, to be sure, but also using the weight of the office. And when it comes to things like foreign policy, which we'll see more of tomorrow with Benjamin Netanyahu, often the president is a singular figure in American life and can have a lot of sway. So also emotional. I've been talking to those who've been serving with the president who expected that he would compete in the election. And they, of course, on his side, thought there would be a second term. There's been a lot of sadness, even one using the term mourning, about the fact that this decision changes his life, the life of the country, and for all of those on his team, official and campaign, it changes things too. Hallie?
Can you give us a bit of a vibe check, Kelly? I imagine that staffers might be together watching the president's speech tonight.
There is a plan for a reception and for people to be in their offices and watching this together. It is one of those collective moments, much like a State of the Union address. This one, of course, is infused with a lot of emotion for them and for him, and also a sense of pride, many of them say, because they believe that the president made a choice which goes against what the impulses of politicians are typically ascribed to be about their own agenda, their own ambition, and they believe that this is the president reaching a hard decision, one that took him a while to get to, but one that they say puts the country in front of his own personal agenda and his own ambitions. So choosing to be a one-term president at a consequential time.
Kelly O'Donnell, lots to watch, as that's going to be a late night for you. Thank you so much. We'll have special coverage, of course, of that address from the Oval Office at 8 o'clock Eastern. However you're watching right now on NBC News Now or over on our NBC network, Yamiche Alcindor is traveling with the vice president in Indiana because while the attention is on President Biden tonight, obviously, for all the reasons that Kelly laid out, it has been, and starting at about, 9:01 p.m. tonight, right, we'll return to Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the front runner to replace the president at the top of the ticket. We have now seen her yet again delivering this kind of campaign message, Yamiche. Walk us through the dynamics there and what we don't see behind the scenes. What's happening on the staffing front? What's happening on the strategy front, if you will?
Yeah, well, I want to start, Hallie, with the fact that the vice president came to Indianapolis to speak to a gathering of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. It's part of the Divine Nine. They are a group of historically black fraternities and sororities. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, which is part of the Divine Nine. And if I'm looking out, it's a sea of blue and white. It's a sea of also black women who are really the most loyal base of the Democratic Party. So they're really leaning in to make sure that their base is energized. They want to also be leaning into the energy, talking about fundraising, talking about the idea that they want people to be knocking on doors. And to that end, she was leaning into what the history of these organizations are as a Divine Nine. These are organizations that were founded by people who really focused on service, focused on civil rights. So take a listen to what she told this crowd.
We know when we organize, mountains move. When we mobilize, nations change. And when we vote, we make history.